My name is Ethan, and this is my video presentation for STS176, Building a Case Against Vaccines. In this presentation, we will focus on the question, how do vaccine skeptics construct a compelling model of truth against institutional scientific authorities in the vaccine autism controversy? Our two groups are the institutional scientists, notably the CDC and the World Health Organization, and skeptics of institutional science, notably Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and other alternative practitioners. The institutional claim states that authority comes from science as a process, peer review, reproducibility, and global collaboration, and claims come from data, clinical studies, and consensus. The skeptical claim is rooted in the idea that institutions are inherently untrustworthy. Medical mistrust in the United States isn't rooted in a single event, such as the Tuskegee syphilis study, but in a broader historical pattern of institutional harm. The Tuskegee study is one of the clearest examples of how government-sponsored medicine has violated vulnerable populations, creating a long-term legacy of justified skepticism towards public health authorities. This is from the final report of the Syphilis Study Legacy Committee of 1996. Vaccine skeptics draw on this legacy to argue that institutions like the CDC, NIH, and WHO cannot be trusted, positioning their critique within a much older narrative of state deception. This dynamic aligns with what Susan Lepselter, in her book, The Resonance of Unseen Things, describes as resonant apophenia, the way people perceive scattered events as a part of a coherent underlying structure of domination or hidden power. Lepselter explains that uncanny narratives gain force from the accumulated stories that point to a forgotten something, in this case rooted in racial violence, medical experimentation, and state control, which can be found on page 18. Even when individuals do not mention Tuskegee explicitly, the context of institutional exploitation still underlies the contemporary mistrust, shaping how people interpret new scientific claims. For vaccine skeptics, Tuskegee becomes a part of a larger pattern, historical proof that government and medical institutions have harmed people before and can harm people again. This mirrors Lepselter's argument that people often interpret current events through their emotional residue of prior trauma, which creates a moral and political lens through which institutional authority becomes inherently suspect. In this way, skepticism towards vaccines is not only about disputed data. It is about a sense of vulnerability to powerful institutions that have previously exploited marginalized communities. By situating Tuskegee within Lepselter's framework, we see why scientific rebuttals alone fail to persuade skeptics. Mistrust is not just a disagreement over evidence, but a response shaped by cultural memory, trauma, and long-standing narratives about hidden systems of power. To understand why institutional science and vaccine skeptics clash so intensely, we need to look at how science justifies its own authority. Sociologist Robert Merton, in The Normative Structure of Science, explains that scientific credibility is built on a set of norms which together form the moral and technical foundation of scientific practice. Merton describes how these norms ensure that scientific claims are judged by evidence rather than the identity of the person making them, making universalism central to how scientists evaluate truth. This is on page 270. Communalism emphasizes that scientific knowledge must be part of the public domain, drawn from page 274. This is exactly why institutions like the CDC and the World Health Organization structure their claims around published data, reproducibility, and peer review. Their legitimacy depends on transparency and the collective evaluation of evidence. Vaccine skeptics reject this entire credibility framework. Instead of communalism, they frame scientific data as something hidden or withheld by elites. Instead of disinterestedness, skeptics assume institutional scientists are financially compromised or politically motivated. And instead of organized skepticism, skeptics adopt totalizing skepticism, treating all institutional information as inherently suspect. This inversion of Merton's norms is part of what allows skeptics to construct a compelling model of truth. Their critique isn't primarily methodological, but moral and political, positioning themselves as the outsiders protecting children, bodily autonomy, or medical freedom against an untrustworthy establishment. This is why skeptical narratives resonate so powerfully even when they lack scientific rigor. They're able to draw on different value systems than institutional science does. This dynamic is visible in the early seeds of the vaccine autism controversy. Andrew Wakefield's 1998 paper linking the MMR vaccine to developmental disorders framed vaccine science as negligent and potentially harmful, positioning his findings as a revelation that institutional authorities had supposedly ignored. Similarly, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s 2005 article, Vaccinations, Deadly Immunity, amplifies the idea of a government and pharmaceutical cover-up, framing himself as a whistleblower, exposing hidden dangers of the government. Both Wakefield and Kennedy rely on emotionally driven testimony, anecdotal stories, and so-called hidden documents that create a sense of rebellion against the government and suspicion towards scientific institutions. Their claims spread rapidly through social media, an environment designed to be an echo chamber, making it easy for these narratives to reach parents who are already anxious about their children's health. Even though the CDC and World Health Organization respond with research, systematic reviews, and fact checks, these counter-arguments often get dismissed as the government telling you what is right, which only reinforces the skeptical worldview. For example, the World Health Organization's Global Advisory Committee on Vaccine Safety has repeatedly found no evidence linking vaccines, including MMR or vaccine ingredients like thimerosal, to autism, yet this conclusion is often ignored by skeptics who see it as another government-aligned institution asserting authority rather than presenting neutral scientific findings. So I'm here with my dad. What experience do you have with vaccine research?
My job is drug development and drug discovery. Some of the projects are vaccine related. My part of the job is finding out small molecule chemicals that can serve as a vaccine to prevent starting of certain diseases, including flu, polio, and a bunch of virus-related diseases.
So as a vaccine researcher, why is it so hard to make definitive statements like vaccines are not linked to autism?
It's hard to 100% prove that it has nothing to do with it. Okay. Because vaccine is not just one chemical. Vaccine itself has a lot related to it, including the vehicle, which the actual vaccine chemical is carried through human body. And also the way vaccine are applied, such as you take orally as a pill or get injection, and all those administration can have effects on human body, which may relate it to certain symptoms which is some people consider it related to autism, which is not true. For example, there are certain cases that trace back to the mercury-related material in the vehicle of certain old formulation, which is no longer in use as of now. So it's really hard to say it has nothing to do with it unless you don't take it at all. Since right now, any human being has contact with so many different chemicals, it's hard to say which of them can be a trigger of certain things, including autism. Blame it directly on certain vaccine or vaccine collectively is not fair, and there's no way you can absolutely say has nothing to do with it unless a huge group of population doesn't take vaccine at all as a comparison group.
So you kind of bring this up, but as somebody who makes claims about vaccines, why is it so hard to counter the group that so loudly states that vaccines are linked to negative effects, such as autism?
When someone make a claim without any scientific background or finding, it's really hard to counter it. We cannot fight air. If someone say this certain things is related to vaccine, then we can find a lot of research saying, okay, this is not true. When they just shout out and claim this is the situation, we don't know where to fight.
The political stakes of the vaccine autism debate extend far beyond the question of medical evidence. What makes this controversy so powerful is that it sits at the intersection of public health authority and individual autonomy. Institutional science frames vaccination as collective responsibility, while skeptics reframe vaccine refusal as an act of personal and political freedom. Because institutional claims are delivered through agencies like the CDC and NIH, scientific information often becomes entangled with state power, making it vulnerable to broad distrust of government authority. In contrast, skeptical narratives align with the populist defiance, positioning themselves as grassroots resistance against elite control. This political dynamic becomes clear when understood through Stephen Epstein's analysis of lay expertise in his 1995 article, The Construction of Lay Expertise, AIDS Activism and the Forging of Credibility in the Reform of Clinical Trials. Epstein argues that during the AIDS crisis, activists gained scientific legitimacy by mastering biomedical language, engaging directly with researchers, and altering the rules of clinical trials from within established institutions, which can be found on page 409 through 415. Their credibility was earned through participation, accountability, and adherence to the norms of scientific practice. Anti-vaccine activists mimic the appearance of Epstein's model while rejecting its underlying commitments. Like treatment activists Epstein describes, they adopt technical language, using terms such as adverse events, their signal, immunogenicity, and the mRNA platform to signal scientific fluency. Rather than entering scientific institutions the way AIDS activists did, however, they construct parallel infrastructures, alternative medical conferences, pseudo-research institutes, self-appointed expert networks, and social media channels treated as authoritative. These structures simulate the credibility-building mechanisms that Epstein outlines, yet they do so without peer review, methodological transparency, or institutional accountability. Where Epstein's activists linked the participation of AIDS activists to ethical claims about patient survival and democratic inclusion in research, anti-vaccine activists link their technical vocabulary to political narratives such as medical freedom, parental rights, and protect the children. In doing so, they generate powerful forms of cultural authority, not through evidence, but through moralized storytelling that casts institutional science as an agent of coercion. This mirrors Epstein's framework, but inverts its purpose. Instead of expanding legitimate participation in science, such tactics undermine the epistemic norms that scientific credibility depends on. Through this lens, the vaccine autism controversy is not simply a dispute over data, but a political struggle over who gets to define credible knowledge, what counts as expertise, and whether scientific authority can survive within a populist climate that increasingly treats institutions as mechanisms of domination. Overall, the dynamics of the debate signal that the controversy is not just about vaccines or autism. The debate is a broader struggle over who gets to define medical truth, who gets to define expertise, and where the boundaries of bodily autonomy should be within for state authority. The conflict is fundamentally political and cultural, not merely scientific, and any responses that ignores this will fail to resonate with the dissenting crowd.